Apyayantu mamangani vak pranashchakshu shrotramatho balamindriyani cha sarvani sarvam brahma upanishadam maham brahma nirakuryam Mama Brahma Nirakarot Anirakaranam Astvanirakaranam Me Astu Tadatmani Nirate Upanishatsu Dharmaste Mayi Santu Te Mayi Santu Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So far we have seen that awareness is not an object given to you. It is not something that you can see or grasp or hear. It's not something that you can objectify, like what happened yesterday or what did we have for food today, or how your sleep was. If I ask you how was your sleep, you would immediately kind of go inside that memory, and then that image will pop up. So that's how the mind works. It works through images. It brings forward images, and even sounds. They're just different kinds of images, and they get presented to your mind in the light of awareness. They get revealed, and thereby awareness cannot be in that same category of either Sajatiya, Vijatiya, or Swagata Bheda, because all these three categories have opposites, but awareness has no opposite. If awareness was, as I said before, love, then you could never tell apart that which is opposite, like hate. If awareness was bliss, then you could never light up or recognize not bliss. And most of the life is not bliss. It's just, kind of moving through. So what I first want us to understand, which is crucial, is that it's not something you will ever be able to objectify. The more you try, the more crazy you'll get. Okay, it is that in whose presence this mind is trying to objectify it. It what reveals, it shows, it in the light of awareness, there is a mind that is desperately trying to grasp awareness. In the light of awareness, in the presence of awareness, there is a mind that has finally stopped trying to grasp awareness, because it has recognized that I can never grasp myself, I can never grasp the subject. I am the subject. The subject can never be grasped. The knower can never be grasped. Only the known can be grasped. Even if you say something like, well, of course I can grasp the knower, but that is just a thought that was grasped in the light of the subject. So the subject remains always the ever knower, and in the presence of this knower, there is a knowing. The seer, the subject remains the seer. In the presence of the seer, there is seeing, hearing, objectifying. And thereby, this is in Sanskrit, awareness, what we call, as I said before, swataha siddha. It's not only evident to everyone, but it's also swayam prakasha, which is self-effulgent, self-luminous. In other words, there's only one principle about you that is self-effulgent effortlessly. Everything else takes time to be lit up, such as what did you have for breakfast today? It takes time to light it up, but you don't have to wait any time to reveal yourself, to know yourself as an existent conscious being, because you are always, all your life, you've been conscious and existent. The only thing was, owing to atyasa, we mistook that which is existent and conscious, and we attributed it to the body-mind. And this is everyone's experience when they get born. Then we said, what is this awareness? And we said it is also attributeless. And what this means is that pure logic, for the wood, for example, the substance, to be free, to be able to manifest as a Buddha statue, as a boat, it has to be intrinsically free of both the Buddha statue and the boat. If it was stuck, if some form or shape or sound was stuck to the wood, it would always be that wood throughout the entire world. So for any cause to manifest as different effects, that cause has to be free of those effects. That is just logic. Okay? And we use an example of a bottle, in this case, not a bottle, but a glass, and we don't have to free this glass from kind of remove the different colored pens. We just understand that if I can show you a red pen, and you see, yeah, so the glass is red. So from your standpoint, you're seeing the glass as red, like so, okay? Now, suppose I move the glass further away, right? Because I know we can kind of see now and say, no, it's a pen behind. But suppose we had a little bit more sophisticated show here, and I maybe put a red cloth here, and I move this back, and you kind of like, yeah, that's definitely a red glass. It would really look like a red glass. And then still, while I remain far behind, then I remove that. But while removing, I show simultaneously, right behind I show a green. So as the red is moving, immediately the green is following. So I never allow you to see that the glass is pure. Always one attribute is following another. And you say, you can make two statements about this observation. The first, you can say, well, it's very obvious that this glass is always contaminated by attributes. The second thing you can observe is you can say, well, just the fact that the red was able to go away and give way to the green means that it was free of the red all along. And just the fact that the green can go away and immediately give way to blue means that it was also free of the green. What color did I say, right? So this, now you don't have to keep on doing it to 16 million colors, to 20 trillion experiences. If it's true for just two experiences, it's true for infinite amount of experiences. So like this, we showed that for the cause to be able to manifest as infinite amount of effects, that cause has to be intrinsically free of those effects which it appears as. And then we said, after having explained awareness, we then conducted an inquiry and we said, how does the world resolve? How do these names, these forms, how do they all resolve inside awareness? And we said that the entire Jagat, which means the world, which consists of time, space, and all objects in time and space. So I mean all periodic table of elements, space, air that you're breathing now, fire, water, soil, anything in this universe you can imagine, it is included in the word Jagat, including time and space. And we said that all those three, the entire Jagat, space, time, and objects, can be put into one of these three types of attribute categories. So that's why I showed you Sajatiya Bheda, right? You can have the same group, like human species or trees or animals or all insects or all fish. But between each fish, there is differences. So the attributes between same group is different. And then attributes between different kind of groups, which is Vijatiya Bheda, such as between rocks and plants. So there are different types of rocks and there are different types of plants. So even that you can put in the first category. You can put, right, first Sajati, I can put all rocks. You know how many rocks there are? Millions, different, go to underneath the caves and you'll see all colorful kinds of rocks and minerals. But you can also put it in the second category and compare it to some different group, such as trees. So now you got what dictates the difference between rocks and trees? Again, attributes, okay? But a lot more attributes than in the first category. But it doesn't matter. Either way, it's attributes. And the third category is Swagata Bheda, which means that if you take a rock, then that rock is made of so many little intricate parts like silica and graphite, and that's reducible into so many finer particles. So what therefore makes up the rock? Many kinds of attributes. So this means you don't have to dismiss, number one, these attributes. We are fully including these attributes. However, if you take any one object in this universe, any one from these three categories, including space and time, which I will analyze a little bit later, how is that also reducible, you come to a certain analysis and you will see that it all reduces down into concepts. So you cannot quite, right now, you're looking at this glass and you're saying, well, it's a solid object. But I cannot find, if I look deeper, I cannot find glass. I find just, what's glass made of? I think sand, right? And it somehow has obtained this shape, and I'm calling sand or silica, right? This glass. So I'm giving sand a name called glass. But then I take sand and I look into sand, and that is made of trillions of different particles, right? Atoms. So is it really sand or is it atoms? Well, it's both. It is, in other words, the sand is appearing as sand is appearing as glass. Atoms are appearing as sand. Particles are appearing as atoms. In other words, you cannot find a final building block in this universe. This is just pure science. Up to now, you don't need Vedanta, by the way. This is just purely physics. Quantum physics say this world that you see is just particles, and yet the particles are putting themselves together, making it look like a plant, or even your flesh, or your leg, or even your thoughts. So we're not even speaking Vedanta yet. This is just pure science. And they support Vedanta very much. So in other words, our focus is on these forms, which are nothing but reducible down, or merely down into pure concepts. Careful, I didn't say awareness. You have to first come to concepts. Otherwise, you're going to have these kind of, these people writing articles about you can't reduce the world into awareness. No, you can't. That is why you have to first have an order. Everything reduces down into concepts. In other words, even quarks, you come to a point where even the quantum physicists will say there's a fuzzy relationship between particles and waves or probabilities. In other words, they can't quite, is it a particle or is it a wave? They don't quite, it's not 100% sure. And if you reduce it further, you come to mere mathematical formulas. So in other words, it goes from more tangible, but if you look into the tangibility, it goes more and more and more abstract into mere mathematical formulas. And then Vedanta steps in and says, you cannot figure out what is the final building block of all that is here. Before you say consciousness, it is concepts. Now, how do you demonstrate this? How do you demonstrate that this world comes out of concepts? Because if you look into any form right now, I cannot find glass here. It is sand. I cannot find sand here. It is atoms. I cannot find atoms. It is electron and proton and neutron. I cannot find electron, proton, neutron. It is quarks. I cannot find a quark. It is concepts. How do we know it's concept? Because from the quarks arrange themselves intelligently to form atoms. Atoms are intelligently forming themselves together to create a molecule. Why is it 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen? Why not 3? Because if it was 1 atom out, it would not be water, and therefore the entire ecosystem would die. So who decided that it's going to be specifically 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen? Intelligence. It's not a random putting together. Therefore, concept doesn't mean mental concepts, because I know you can kind of interpret it like that. It means a final building block which is intangible, it's undefinable, and yet there must be a cause, because you cannot find an effect without a cause. You cannot find quarks. Just because science cannot see beyond quarks doesn't mean there's nothing there. Just like once upon a time we said, no, atoms are the final thing, there's nothing after atoms. But Vedanta all along was saying, no matter what you discover, you can discover even smaller than quarks, all you want. The final building block, that quark you cannot actually find under any kind of instrument. There's no quark, there's no atom, there's no glass here. There's only name and form glass here. There's only name and form sand. There's only name atom. There's only name molecule. So the names are true, but if you look into the essence of those names, they are reducible down and down and down. My God, I cannot find anything here. But it reduces down into finally the concept, because you cannot have something come out of nothing. And this world, you cannot say it's nothing. This world is something. Otherwise, what is there to talk about? Why do we use so many names? That implies there is something. So the analysis is looking into this something, and through analysis, you see that this something is vastly connected to something else. So this means if one thing is connected to another, then the creator of one thing must know about the creator of this, since they are connected. Therefore, the final building block of the universe, which the science hasn't come to yet, maybe one day, the closest they've come to is strings. They call them intelligent strings. But these are hypotheses. Not only that, but strings are still within space and time. We're talking about concept from which even space and time and strings and bosons and gravitons and photons and whatever these scientific terms you want to give come. Therefore, concept is the final building block. Knowledge. What kind of knowledge? Sarvajna Sarvashakti. All knowledge from which emanates this world, from which emanates the stars, from emanates the light, and how fast light will travel. Why does it travel 290, whatever, 8,000 kilometers or something? Why not faster? Why not slower? Again, why do you have 5 fingers? And why do you not have 2 noses and eyes at the back of your head? We don't know. But what we do know, this is how it is. And there is a design behind it all. And it's working. You just take 1 finger off, you cut 1 finger off, and you'll see how inconvenience life becomes. So there is a design behind all these creations. And that design, that intelligence, we call Ishvara, the intelligence. So it's not some inert intelligence. It is, you cannot think of intelligence outside of a conscious being. You cannot think of your thought. Your thought is nothing but a concept. Also, remember this, I'm not just talking about physical forms. I'm talking about your subtle forms also, your mind. It's a different kind of matter, but it's also concepts. Now, can you think of a concept outside of you, the conscious being? Can there a concept exist outside you, the conscious being? The concept depends upon your presence, upon the conscious being's presence. You understand this? A concept depends upon your awareness of it. Knowledge depends upon a conscious being. Knowledge depends, in other words, knowledge is mithya, depends on satyam, awareness. So in other words, all of the world of time, space, and objects, we have reduced into concepts. So you don't have to now reduce objects one by one. You just apply analysis to one object, and that analysis applies to every object. And what does it all reduce to? intelligence. Stop there, intelligence. And now, having reduced the whole universe to nothing but concepts, blueprint, knowledge from which everything comes, then the final question says, then what is the relationship between concept and awareness, the final reality? It's Satya Mithya, because a concept can not exist outside the conscious being. Knowledge can't exist. You cannot think of intelligence putting things together if it's inert. It has to be within a conscious presence, within awareness, within a conscious being. It's like a person in a coma. That can be Einstein, but there's just no consciousness there. So their knowledge is just useless. So a conscious being needs to be there in whom knowledge can take place and start assembling quarks, start assembling particles, start assembling atoms, start assembling every assembly upwards until eventually you say, wow, world, body, person, dog, face, light. So what an ordinary person sees is forms. What a Vedantin sees is one more reality, concepts. What a scientist sees is quarks. What a Vedantin sees is concepts, knowledge. All that is here is knowledge. A scientist comes back from the lab and they say, all that is here is atoms, quarks, particles. We say all that is here is intelligence, manifesting, taking the shape of this, of air, of you, thinking right now, shaking head, thought is coming, thought is going, concepts manifesting, unmanifesting, manifesting, unmanifesting. In whom? The conscious being. So what remains when the concept has unmanifested? Conscious being remains, awareness remains. When the concept manifests in the form of your thought, for example, or in the form of a cell from 2 to 4 to 16, cell replication, bring it back down to thought. When the concept manifests as your thought, who's there still? The same awareness which was there when that concept goes into unmanifest. Where does that concept go into the unmanifest? Into the conscious being. Where else can it go? Where does a concept come out of? The conscious being. From whom else is it going to come out of? Where does a concept resolve into? The conscious being. The conscious being who is there, whether the concept manifests or unmanifests. So there's no question of saying awareness is vijatiya bheda, as in something different from the world. Because everything reduces to concepts, and concepts reduce into awareness. Where is the question of saying awareness is one thing and this chair is another thing? Is table and wood two different things? Ultimately, no. And yet there is a name for the wood manifesting as something that looks like a chair. And yet there is no difference between a chair and the wood. In other words, we're not denying forms, we're not denying differences. Differences are there, but all differences are manifestations of concepts, blueprint, knowledge, intelligence. And concept finally resolves into the conscious being, without which the concept has no existence, while awareness exists independent of the concept. And how is that awareness known to you right now? Into which the entire universe resolves? I am, I am, I am. So what happens if you miss out on this presence of concepts and awareness? What's the cost? What's the cost if you miss out on this presence and awareness? Where is your focus then? Forms. On the individual who's going to die one day. Concerns. The cost is huge. Mortality. In other words, your focus, your identity goes into mithya. And this is a long road, I tell you. Converting everything into mithya. Even philosophy becomes mithya. Vedanta becomes another object to discuss, to philosophize.
Does concept equal intelligence equals Ishvara? Could you say that?
I will talk about Ishvara. Concept is intelligence, another name. It's synonymous. Okay? And Ishvara means intelligence. However, I will speak a little bit more about Ishvara and what is specifically, in what context Ishvara is the right word to use. Generally, yes. Okay? Generally, yes. Ishvara is intelligence. In other words, it depends upon Brahman. It depends on awareness. Okay? However, I'm still yet to answer, because I know you're going to have an objection, at least those who are in thinking, and you're going to say, but concept is still an attribute. How does an attribute resolve into an attributeless reality? I know you're going to ask this, and we're yet to answer this. Okay? So I want to show you that Vedanta doesn't just talk random beliefs that you're like, oh, that's how it is. We use logic, step by step. Otherwise, if you still kind of walk away going, yeah, but it doesn't make sense, well, it's our job to answer these loopholes, these questions.
If you say Zakat concepts, consciousness.
Yes.
Concepts is not Ishvara, or is...
A concept means a blueprint or knowledge, which is reshuffling itself to manifest as a quark.
Do you have a Sanskrit equivalent for that, for concept?
So concept is Ishvara.
So it's Ishvara.
Yeah. However, I will refine the word Ishvara a little bit more, because it's not just a one-off answer. Okay. It's coming, don't worry.
Thank you.
Okay. So again, when we do not know about these two additional realities, you can kind of have a smooth ride. It's up to you. But the thing is, your identity is in mithya. Now, there are two kinds of mithya. So mithya means, as I said, dependent on something else. So the first kind of mithya, before I say that, why am I explaining this now? Because we're going to go through an analysis very soon and discover that when you know this world to be nothing but concepts and awareness, there's actually no experiential change in you at all. In other words, one who gets liberated and recognizes the truth, there is absolutely no experiential change whatsoever. Now, I have to demonstrate this to you instead of just saying it. So to do that, I want to first talk about two kinds of mithyas. The first is called vyavaharika. It is what is empirically true. So in one simple understanding, it is, therefore my mind perceives it. Okay? It is, therefore I see it. In other words, it is the universally collected, shared environment. So we all look over there and we say sun. Nobody says it's an elephant. So we're not imagining it. In other words, and also if you look at a tree, for example, it's not just some inert thing. It's not ignorance. Some people say, reality is ignorance. Don't say these things. Otherwise, there's no reverence for the world. You kind of live this world as, oh, it's all ignorance. How can you call a tree ignorance? I don't even know how to build a tree. Do you? Where's the question of ignorance? In fact, that thing has more knowledge than all of us put together. And we call it ignorance. And who's saying that? The one who doesn't know how the thing is built. So in other words, it's not ignorance, it is knowledge all across from the seed stage. All little by little, it germinates and it grows and and it holds itself just deep enough into the ground in the right environment not to get tipped over by the winds. And if it's in the desert, the roots don't have to go as deep. So it knows exactly how deep the roots should go, depending on what kind of environment it's based in. And it also knows how to share and doesn't steal all the water for itself from the next door neighbor tree. This is just utter intelligence all across. So anything in Vyavaharika is to be understood as not ignorance, intelligence. It is intelligently well put together, intelligently combined, put together. And this is again not a belief. I'm not saying a tree is well put together. It is. How many functions does a tree have? It's got veins and bark, and it's able to sustain itself against the winds and give fruits. And those fruits give life to the birds, and they survive. And sometimes the flower grows, and it's able to give the pollen and the nectar to the bees, which they use for food. And they fill up my jar with honey, which is lovely. So, and I say yum, And so there's a connection between all things. Did you ever wonder how a bee knows that it's already pollinated that flower amongst thousands of flowers? Could you do that? Come on, man. It knows. And it knows how to return to the beehive, sometimes a kilometer away. And it knows how to tell all the other bees, hey, by the way, I pollinated flower 3,265. And all of the bees understand this. They do a little jiggle dance. And this jiggle dance can have variances. If it's one movement out, then they got it wrong. Then the flowers will be pollinated again. They know exactly how much to jiggy dance to make sure they've communicated the right message. Do not pollinate flower 3,268. Where's the question of ignorance? It's just awe, reverence, how much intelligence goes into anything. Therefore, Vyavaharika is the first type. It means empirically true. And the second type of mithya is pratibhasika. This is where I see it, right? My mind sees it, and therefore it is. Some politicians are under the influence of this, right? The election is rigged, therefore it is like that, right? Things like that. In other words, this is personal biases. This is personal ideas of how things are. Therefore, if something doesn't match that, I discard it. So it's a bubble, and most of the world is living in bubbles. Most of the people are living in personal bubbles, ideas of what life is and how it should be, how it shouldn't be. So a lot of work has to first go into popping bubbles. Otherwise, I just can't show you this Vyavaharika world. And therefore, you're not going to begin analyzing the Vyavaharika world that it's reducible down into concepts. In other words, you won't take any interest at all because the person's so busy in their little, I see it, therefore it is. That's why pratibhasika is so important. In fact, 95%, in my estimation, I could be kind of wrong or right about this, it's hard to tell. In my opinion, 95% of Advaita Vedanta is popping bubbles. Pratibhasika about 95, only 5% is what we're teaching now. The knowledge.
It all goes back to this Covido ergo sum, I think, and that's why I am. And that's exactly the bubble, what I create by I think, and that's why.
Yeah. It can also have a nice context in terms of kind of uplifting yourself. As we talked yesterday, uplifting yourself by yourself. Therefore, you got to think, I can do it. I can do this. I can come up and talk. And therefore you achieve that. But at the same time, you can go the other way, and you can kind of say it's reinforced deep in the culture. Not only that, but also there's this independence, especially in the Western culture, or who knows, everywhere. I think it, therefore I'm happy with it, and I'm good enough with that. I don't need to look beyond that. So this is why 95% is just popping bubbles one after the other. How the guru is supposed to look like, what they're supposed to talk, what they're supposed to not say and say, what they're supposed to wear, what they're supposed to, this endless nonsense. And the teacher has seen it all. So one privilege of teaching is that you really see the colors of how pratibhasika expresses itself. And you come to realize that there's not much you can do about it. Right? Sometimes a person just needs to go back into the world, have their bubbles popped, and then come back with humility. So the more bubbles get popped, the more down to earth, the more humble the person is. The more bubbles remain, it transfers into this kind of, I know it, I don't need to be told, and all of these, complexes. Okay? So two realities. Vyavaharika, it is, therefore I see it as it is, and pratibhasika is, I see it, therefore that's how it is. Okay? So, now what about water? Little trick question for you. Water is cold. That is vyavaharika fact. But isn't cold kind of also pratibhasika? Yeah. So you see, again, it's not a black or white thing. Sometimes you also add your own opinion. You say, vyavaharika, cold water, good. Well, for you guys, I think in Germany or Netherlands, you wouldn't be as cold as I would be in Australia, right? So I would call it mitya's mitya. So pratibhasika is called mitya's mitya. So if vyavaharika is mitya, then pratibhasika is mitya's mitya. In other words, your pratibhasika depends on vyavaharika, and vyavaharika depends on the final reality, which is consciousness, awareness. Okay. So I just want to show you how these two, vyavaharika and pratibhasika, I haven't written this down. So vyavaharika is pratibhasika. So this is subjective and empirical. Okay. So I just want to show you how these two cause ignorance, how ignorance happens. So vyavaharika, what happens is that you get a vyavaharika body. Your body is vyavaharika. You didn't imagine it, right? You didn't kind of experientially create it. It was created for you. So your body you came with. Is it pratibhasika, your body and your mind? Okay. Now, when I say your mind, you kind of say it is pratibhasika a little bit, but I'm talking about who created the concept of memory, that which can store data, that which can analyze data, that which can emote, that which can produce a sense of individuality. That you didn't create. All we do is we fill those four functions with data of the world. Now, in that sense, you can call it pratibhasika. But besides that, the mind is vyavaharika. Okay? You understand this? Okay, good. So we all get born, that means I, awareness, because everything reduces to awareness, remember? So now I can say I, so in other words, whatever gets born is awareness, because everything is awareness. So I, awareness, gets born with one body and mind attached, which is not your creation, it is empirical. It is an empirical design. It is Ishwara's design. In other words, you came wearing, awareness came with a suit, with a clothing, and you did not do that. You came like that. You didn't decide that. So having come, I, awareness, having come with this cloth, which is this much, it's not over here, it's over here, then naturally, also being given a mind, it's able to look at other bigger things and more shinier things. It starts to, which is another possibility, compare that versus this. It starts to make some calculations. Why is this being not so strong? There are stronger beings, there are singers, and I cannot use my voice like that. I cannot hug. I don't have the courage to say sorry, and there's something's wrong with me. So now, what happens is you start to add more pressures on top of your vyavaharika body-mind. So therefore, you start to add pratibhasika. You start to add subjectivity, and therefore you further load your I. You further load awareness, you, of your own opinions, because you came with an empirical body-mind. In other words, there's a subsequent errors get made. I came with a body-mind, which I didn't choose. It was always given to me awareness. And because it was always given to me, including this life, the mind was used to make subsequent conclusions what it means for me awareness to be wearing this body mind. And thereby complexes started to form, personality complexes, and this transferred into pain. And thereby we have psychologists and we have therapists. They're all there to help us kind of pop these personal bubbles. Okay? Now, Vedanta comes in and it shows you one more reality. It says, not only, you don't need Vedanta to say that your pratibhasika is mithya, to say that pratibhasika is your personal stuff. You don't need Vedanta for that. But Vedanta says anyway, pratibhasika is mithya because it depends on your body mind. It depends on your mind. Your own notions depend on your mind. Your own ideas about you depend on chittam, the memory. If you had no memory, could you even remember all of these ideas that you've acquired about what it means to wear this body and mind? Forget. In other words, it says vyavaharika is also mithya. There is something about you that is not changing, which is sadharana. It is common, always the same. It is self-evident, which is swayam prakasha. It is swataha siddha. It is self-luminous, and it is the awareness, which is the truth of all forms, all ideas, which is the all kind of subtle forms, and subtle and gross forms and matter. And that I am is the universal I am. Why is it universal I am? How is your I am universal I am, which is lighting up all minds? Explain this.
It is one. It's the same.
Yeah, why is it the same?
The only it doesn't have attributes.
Excellent. So I like specificity. So I made a statement. How is universal? How is your awareness or your I am universal? In other words, how is your I am lighting up my mind right now? That's a statement. I have to prove it immediately. And then I asked the question, and you said it is attributeless. That means from my standpoint, awareness doesn't take on any attributes. Were it to take on an attribute, then it would become an object known to me all the time. And I would be able to describe it to you specifically and confidently. But I cannot do that at all because all thoughts are in coming and going in my awareness. And awareness remains free, nothing gets stuck onto it, and that is exactly your experience too. So if nothing sticks onto my awareness and nothing sticks onto your awareness, then by definition, your awareness is completely attributeless. My awareness is completely attributeless. Therefore, it is one universal awareness. Because the only way you can say that your awareness, your consciousness is different from mine is you would have to give it some kind of a feature, a property, a characteristic, an emotion, a color, an idea. But those ideas, did you know, suppose you give your awareness an idea, some concept, like it's, what should we say?
2 square meters.
Okay, my awareness is 2 square meters. Now, you only learned that language in school. You didn't know what square and a meter was before grade 1. So in other words, you're depending on a certain point in your life to have learned certain words, which you then stole in order to attach onto yourself and then claim yourself to be 2 square meters. So in other words, no matter what you say to me, it is always dependent on something you heard in the world, you saw in the world. But the world is nothing but vyavaharika. And the vyavaharika world always collapses into concepts, and concepts always collapse into awareness. Okay? And therefore, everything about you is also the final reality awareness. There's no question of saying, I am different from this body. This is preliminary understanding, by the way, where we say subject is one thing and object is another thing. This is beginner level Vedanta, by the way. We have to resolve that. Because even the subject, the content of the subject is awareness. The content of the object is awareness. Because the object resolves into concepts, concepts resolve into awareness. Therefore, these kinds of two mithyas, they produce two kinds of superimpositions. The first mithya, which is, we said, vyavaharika mithya, it produces a what's called a empirical superimposition. And what is an example of an empirical superimposition or vyavaharika atyasa? Vyavaharika means empirical, atyasa means superimposition. So either way, right? Empirical superimposition. What kind of effect does it produce? You're wearing one now. Yeah, your body, for example, like objects. So it, yeah, exactly, your knee. So it produces objects and it is not imagined. So the superimposition that is empirically based, an empirical superimposition is not imagined. This is important. Are we clear on this before I move to the next part? Did you imagine your hair right now? Your nose? Your knee? Okay. The second kind of superimposition we said is pratibhasika atyasa. That means subjective superimposition. This is where you see something and only you see that, nobody else sees that. That means it's your own personal stuff. For example, I'm seeing ghosts. Oh, ghosts. Andre, we're not seeing ghosts, sorry. And therefore, I need to go back and kind of look at my ideas and, fix some things up. So this is personally imagined ideas, personal notions. For example, someone tells you something and about another person and it's false. Nothing is true. And then you're holding this idea about that other person. That idea does not belong to 5 other people who know the truth. It only belongs to you who heard misinformation. In that sense, it is pratibhasika. It can also happen in family, right? You think your spouse is late and you're thinking, what are they doing? Are they with someone? And this can become a problem if the person falls for this because they're kind of worried now. And if they let this pratibhasika take over their experience, then when the spouse or the girlfriend or boyfriend returns back, you're going to act in the light of not vyavaharika, but in the light of pratibhasika. And that's going to create the conflict. And they will have to be on the receiving end of it. And if you're not careful, and if you don't ask yourself, is this my personal stuff, or is this an objective fact, then you can kind of go into this, clash. So this is happening all the time. In fact, you could say most of the relationship conflicts are based on this assumption. I'm assuming I know what you're talking about. I assume you know what I'm talking about. And so I don't even communicate it with you because, hey, she knows me for a long time. She should know me. But is this the truth? Never. Like literally almost 99% never. Right? Or idealizing someone. Oh, they're teaching, therefore they're up there. This is unfair, actually, because then you make the other person kind of feel, oh, I'm not that big, I'm just an ordinary human being. So idealizing people is also pratibhasika. Having expectations, how I expect you to, talk to me and not talk to me, this can also become a subjective idea, which can cause miscommunication issues. Oh, she's not talking to me like that. Therefore, I need to now raise myself and just show that I'm like really big for a moment. And then the other person feels intimidated by that. And then you hurt them. This is violation of himsa. Okay? You can see how many issues pratibhasika generates. Quite a bit. Okay? Now, one more thing I want to add is that for superimposition to happen, what needs to occur is you need to know about 2 objects that are being involved. So for example, when you have a rope and you're superimposing a snake because there's no enough light, or a belt, whatever, you don't have to use the rope and snake all the time. I use belt. So suppose you're coming home tired and you just take your snake belt off as a leather, right? You put it on your bed, you go to the park and you're tired and you come back, it's dawn now, right? There's no light. And there's a snake there, right? This literally looks like a snake. And then you scream and then you disturb everyone in the house. and they say, what's wrong, what's wrong? Oh, there's a snake, there's a snake. And they come down and turn on the light, and now you've added more light onto there, and therefore now I can see more information about what I thought was a snake. It was a rope all along, but my own pratibhasika has generated it to be what it's not. We said atasmin tat buddhi. That means the definition of adhyasa is seeing that which is not. I saw the snake, but it was a rope all along. And you say, what's the big deal? It is a big deal because it produces screaming and fear, apprehension, skepticism, and all sorts of psychological issues. Therefore, for adhyasa, superimposition, to take place, you have to know about both involved. Which is why, how is it that you know about the rope and the snake? Because you see them through your eyes. But then what about your awareness? What about awareness? You don't see that, but you still know it. Why? Even though you cannot objectify awareness like the snake or the rope, it's still known to you because it is swataha siddha. It is self-revealing. And because it is self-revealing, for that reason, in that respect, it is known to you. But what else is known to you? The body-mind. Therefore, two factors are known. I am and the body-mind. Because I know both of them, even though the first one, I am, you cannot objectify like the body-mind, but it is known to you because it is swataha siddha, self-evident, swayam prakasha, self-revealing, self-luminous. For that reason, adhyasa can take place. And the fact that you are searching, the fact that we are searching, that the world is searching, implies that you have to know about two things simultaneously. So this means that for chit to be mistaken as a body-mind, and to go into the world and to want to fulfill the I implies I am already in touch with my I just don't know what it is. Okay. Now, the question remains, what happens when either of these superimpositions get removed? So remember, we just spoke about two kinds of superimposition. Pratibhasika adhyasa, in English, subjective superimposition, and vyavaharika adhyasa, empirical superimposition. So let's talk about what happens when you correct the notion, when you get to know vyavaharika, the truth of this world. When you get to know the truth of this world, this jagat, which I said earlier, consists of time, space, and objects, which reduces to concepts. So when you get to know the truth of this world, and remember, don't exclude yourself. Is your body, mind away from the world? No, because the world is made of a periodic table of elements, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, whatever. Your body also has that. And also, your mind is just matter. So do not exclude yourself from the world. So, when you correct a notion about vyavaharika, this is called sopadika adhyasa. So vyavaharika will keep it consistent. So correct, when you get to know the truth about the vyavaharika world, what happens? There's something called sopadika adhyasa. Okay, so what is sopadika adhyasa? It is an empirical superimposition. For example, when you look at the world and you see the world is flat, the earth is flat. Or you look at the sun and the sun is rising, okay? So this is an empirical fact. You didn't imagine the sun rising. You didn't imagine the earth being flat from your standpoint. You genuinely see it as a flat earth. Now, when someone comes up to you and says, well, even though it is appearing to be flat, actually, the truth of this surface is it's round. And even though the sun appears to be moving, right, rising and setting, the reality is the sun is not rising and setting. And you say, oh, that's a very interesting fact. And then tomorrow, what happens? you wake up and you still see the sun rising. You still look into the horizon and you see a flat earth. What's happened here? Has the appearance of flatness disappeared? Has the appearance of the sun disappeared? Has your experience changed? Are you like now, oh, it's just the sun rising? Are you like that? Is there any experiential change? Now that you know that the earth is round? No. What has only changed? Knowledge about that which I saw to be one thing, but it was something else entirely. So sopadika atyasa means when I correct a notion about the empirical world, I have no experiential change whatsoever. The only thing that happens is now I have knowledge, cognitive understanding, not emotional awe, wow. Ordinary, down-to-earth cognitive understanding that what I thought was like this, it's not like that, it's something else. And thereby, you now enjoy the world like you always did. You still talk about the sun setting and rising to your kids. You still talk about the earth being flat. You don't kind of hold this spiritual vibe of being smart or intelligent, just ordinary like anyone else. But silently you understand something different. Therefore, when it comes to understanding that this world, this vyavaharika world, is nothing but mithya, mithya, in other words, it depends that this world that you thought was so real and had independent existence, when you understand it is nothing but mithya, in other words, anything reduces to concepts, and concepts reduce into awareness, and that awareness is known to you right now as I am, I am, I am, I am, I am. Is there any experiential change? None whatsoever. The only thing that's changed is your understanding that the world, which was forms, actually reduces into atoms, actually reduces into concepts, actually reduces into awareness, known to me directly as my self-evident I right now. Same thing with a scientist. A scientist goes and studies 5 years about particles and quantum physics. And now he still has a wife, suppose. And his wife is kind of talking about, oh, flowers, nice, it's all great. But the scientist understands cognitively, it's much more than flowers, my dear. It is atoms and particles, electrons and protons. But for the sake of keeping his wife happy, he will indeed talk the same language as she does. In other words, the scientist also doesn't have an experiential change. Scientist just enjoys a cognitive understanding that there is more than meets the eye. And when it comes to correcting pratibhasika, that means your subjective, right? Subjective. What happens? We call this nirupadika adhyasa. Okay? So I'll show you a way to remember this very easy. So when I correct a notion about my own subjective idea, example, so let's go back to that 5 other people that have the right knowledge about the person, and I alone have been told wrong knowledge or misinformation about the person. And how will I experience knowing he's like the, like the person that I've been told by somebody else? I will experiencing him totally different than these people who have the right knowledge about him. Because my knowledge is incorrect, my personal notion is incorrect. And then I think he's like this, she's like that, he's like that, they're like that. And I'm walking with this angst, this hatred, this anger, this suspicion about this person. And it's totally real for me. Absolutely real from bottom to up. The experience is unpleasant. I can't stand this person. And as someone goes up to me and says, that person who told you this misinformation, That was all wrong. This person is generous, kind, a father. They give charity, they work hard, they're honest, they're a teacher, they are a lover, they are, amazing. And all five confirm. And I see this person is an author who has touched millions of lives. And immediately I melt. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh. Immediately the experience changes completely. So what has changed in Nirupadika Atyasa? Experience has changed. Sopadika Atyasa, there's no change whatsoever, but notion has changed. Nirupadika, not only has the notion changed, but the experience has also changed. How to remember this? It's very simple. S, nice letter here, S means for same. That means same everything, same experience. And N for N means never again the same. Never again the same. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.